Nela, Kalpic, welcome back to our Marcy's Law interview series, Why We Do What We Do. I think it was a few years ago that you were first on when you discussed your journey to America.
It's been a few years. That's right. Hi,
And
Kate.
since then, you have been at the Marcy's Law for Wisconsin effort. Started with the effort when we tried to get Marcy's Law passed in Wisconsin. And you then were the outreach director, and now you're the state director. Is that right?
That's correct.
Well, I wanted to bring you back because you have really been an incredible leader, and have been so innovative in Marcy's Law, not just in Wisconsin, but you've really set a standard for all of us nationally, as to how we can best help victims. A lot of times what happens is when we go into a state to try to get Marcy's Law passed, the first thing we'll do, as you know, is meet with the different stakeholders and tell them a little bit about what Marcy's Law does and how it will impact them, whether it be the district attorney's office, the sheriff's office, domestic violence shelters, victim witness advocates. Um, and it takes a little while for them to understand and fully comprehend how, in fact, it's going to impact them. And then when Marcy's Law passes, and which we've been very blessed to have it passed in so many different states and overwhelming support, like it has in Wisconsin by 75% of the vote, I think. Um, but that's really when the work begins once Marcy's Law is passed, because we want to try to help victims all throughout each state where it's passed. But in order to do it, the stakeholders that have to support these victims need to know what their role is in each point in the criminal justice process. You had an incredible idea years ago when you saw a mapping exercise by the Brown County Sheriff, um, and he was doing it on domestic abuse, I believe domestic violence victims. And you thought that domestic violence cases is one thing, but Marcy's Law might benefit from mapping exercises. So before we get into all of that mapping exercises, just a little bit about you and your bio. You come to this series, Why We Do What We Do, and you're kind of the reason why we have this series, which is people are inspired to get into this really important work for all sorts of different reasons. You are a domestic abuse survivor yourself. And now you're doing everything you can to help people in America and in Wisconsin. Tell us just a little bit about your journey as a domestic abuse survivor to America before we begin.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind is always that image that I had when I just arrived to United States, still married to my abusive now ex-husband, and in New York when I saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time. And the reason why I always think of that imagery is because it's such a good reminder of the moment when I realized that I was actually free. And I think that is such incredible gift that this country gives to all of us here. And since then, I was very fortunate to be able to get the opportunity to work on things that are important to me, starting with domestic violence advocacy, which then later led me to victims' rights. And obviously, very fortunate that I was able to get involved with Wisconsin team, who was already hard at work in trying to pass Marcy's Law at the time when I joined the team.
Yeah, and you really came from a place as a victim where you had no rights. And you came here to America, and you just reminded me of that story when you saw the Statue of Liberty, and it reminded you that you're free, and that you didn't know exactly how that freedom was going to manifest itself, but you knew deep down that freedom was on the horizon. And you've
Oh,
now
remember that. That's true. That's true.
and you've worked so hard to bring these rights to all of these victims in Wisconsin, throughout America, that you never had the benefit of enjoying enforceable victims' rights from where you came. So Tell us a little bit about the mapping exercise, that how you first learned about it and how you decided to implement it for Marcy's Law.
Yeah, well, you know, as you said, most of us, we bring ourselves to this work for different reasons, right? And for me, as someone who is an immigrant who grew up in different countries, but also lived in places where, like you said, there are no rights for those who experience victimization. First thing that I always think when it comes to victims' rights is obviously what's on the books, right? But it's also how are we accessing those rights, meaningful access to those rights, and that starts with conversation. And Marcy's Law team, like I said, worked very hard on drafting the language that's meaningful to the state of Wisconsin. And but then once the amendment passed, then it was about the implementation and conversations and how to best equip both stakeholders but also victims in best ways to access those rights. So mapping exercise, I learned about, you know, mapping in itself as a concept is not, it's been around. But for me, it just made sense to think about it in the context of victims' rights, Marsy's Law, and how are we affording those rights to victims, and really gather all stakeholders, both those that are within the criminal justice system, but also our partners or auxiliary partners, such as victims' rights attorneys or victim service organizations and others, bring them all in the same room and have that conversation.
Yeah. And so, like you were talking to me about just the concept of mapping, and just, we're so familiar with how a map really outlines a journey. And so what this mapping does, and what your vision was that this was going to map the journey of a victim throughout all of the stages of the criminal justice process, from
Right.
start to finish, from the time that the first call is made all the way through post-conviction, which is what the timeline is and the journey is that is encompassed by the rights that are enshrined in the state constitution of Wisconsin and all of the states where Marsy's Law has passed. Now, one of the things, going back to what we were talking about before, when we go into a state, we first talk to the people and we convene with stakeholders, sometimes one at a time, sometimes we'll get a few of them in the room, and they all want to know how it's going to impact them. What you've done throughout this process is you actually allow the stakeholders to see each spot in the criminal justice process and how it impacts them, but also how it impacts all of the other people along the way, and what those people are doing, what they're doing to support a victim, and how it affects what the next stage is going to be. Can you tell us a little bit about all of the people that you would convene? I know you had, at least the first one you did in Brown County, I think you told me you had over 30 people in a room. Tell us about the different people that you had in the room and the different organizations that they represented.
Yes, so the idea is to bring I won't repeat what you said. So bringing everybody in the room. So judges, district attorney office. So let me back up actually just for a little bit. The way we do this is we have partnered with State of Wisconsin Department of Justice, Office of Crime Victim Services, to execute this. So this is an official collaboration between Marsy's Law for Wisconsin and Office of Crime Victim Services in the state of Wisconsin. We then reach out to everyone, all the stakeholders in the county. So obviously district attorney office, that includes district attorney, victim witness, and other staff, then judges, clerks of courts, DOC, forensic nurses, victim service providers, law enforcement, sheriff's office, police department, with Department of Corrections, like I said, everyone, including public defender's office, so that everyone can be there and have that conversation.
And that's interesting that I want to just pick up on that last point, that you also include the public defender's office. Because so many times when we first introduced the concept of Marsy's Law into a state, as you know, from the defense side, the defendants and defense counsel are concerned about when constitutional rights begin to enter into the conversation. Sometimes the idea that constitutional rights are a zero-sum game, um, that's what concerns that's what concerns defense counsel sometimes. To say if you're going to add constitutional rights for victims, does that mean that you're taking away constitutional rights of defendants? Which of course it does not. And so you kind of take away that mystery when you bring them into the process like you do, which I think is just a fantastic idea. And you said that it's really been met very positively by the defense counsel.
Yeah, because I think, we have to remember that everybody who is part of the criminal justice system, including public defender's office, everyone is there for the same reason, right? Everybody works hard to make sure that we are, or to help create and protect communities and create safer communities, right? So everybody has the same goal there. And what is wonderful about this mapping exercise is that as you know, everyone is so busy. Everybody works in their little corner of the world, and everyone is kind of overwhelmed on day-to-day basis. And a lot of times, certain things that happen, how do you fix that if you're not talking to each other? And so again, back to that collaboration. And I think my favorite moments during the mapping exercises that we've had are those aha moments where you have stakeholders who are maybe even meeting each other for the first time. Because one thing that I would say consistently is being said that it's the most unique about this mapping is that it is the first time ever in any of those counties that all these stakeholders are getting together at the same time in the same space. And so it allows them to ask each other questions, to learn what challenges each one is facing, and really look for solutions, right? And also establish best practices, talk about what works, what doesn't work, and find solutions moving forward.
Yeah, in fact, one of the mapping exercises that you did was in Winnebago County, and the district attorney, I saw District Attorney Eric Spar said that one of the great things that came out of it was that these conversations, the important conversations that are held during the exercises, probably don't happen unless they are prompted by convening people together like you have. And he also said that it was important to him as a district attorney that it gave him the opportunity to see what happens in all of the areas that he's not involved in.
Right.
And he just stressed the importance of everybody being in the same room. So if you could lay it out for us, everyone gets in the same room, which is incredible to start with. They're all there, but how does it work? You have scenarios that you introduce.
Yes, so we usually set aside the whole day, right? So like anything important in life, our mapping exercise starts with coffee. Okay. So that so once we do that, we really give everyone the opportunity to, introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what their role is. And then we map out the whole process in terms of how it's supposed to go, who are all the partners that are involved in every stage. And so we kind of set that first. And then we created these mock scenarios that we then, adjust as we go to allow really for nuances and to look for instances where victims may be falling through the cracks for one reason or the other. And we can't do that really unless we have everyone in the room talking about, where the challenges are. And so we then go through those scenarios, and in the end of the day, we have a list of things that are also, obviously there are certain things that are state specific, but a lot of times there are also certain things that are county specific, because as you know, every county is a universe of its own. And so we then we end up with a list of all the things that county could work on, and we bring that back to Department of Justice, Office of Crime Victim Services, and then we work on solutions, and then we offer recommendations as to how to go about those challenges and what can we do better. But also every time we learn. It's incredible how I'm just so both grateful and proud of all Wisconsin counties that were so hard at work. I mean, remember our amendment passed during COVID. So imagine that, right? So they just did an incredible job at trying to implement that in those challenging times. So a lot of times we learn something from them, and then we share it with other counties as best practices recommendation as well. So it goes both ways, and it's great.
Yeah, well, you talk about the after action plan. You and I were talking about one that you're actually putting together right now, that you put together a report and a follow-up plan with tangible solutions that you will actually help implement in each county that you've done. And you've done now 8 different counties. You've done, including Eau Claire County, Winnebago County, La Crosse County. You've done the 3rd biggest county, which is Brown, the 2nd biggest county, which is Milwaukee, and the biggest county is Dane County, and you're doing that next. Is that right?
Yeah, we're doing Dane County in May, which is fantastic. So very grateful for everybody's time, because remember, this is not mandated. And so the fact that people, are taking that time out of their schedules and sitting there and going through this, taking the whole day for this is just incredible. And it speaks to the commitment of all those stakeholders to their commitment to victims' rights.
Yeah, and just to give people a sense of what goes into putting this together, when you talk about people and everyone in this world is so busy, just to give people a sense, when you talk about 40 participants in a room,
Mm-hmm.
these include, and this is just from the Brown County one that you did, you have the Brown County District Attorney's Office represented, both prosecutors and victim witness advocates. You had a domestic abuse program and shelter, the Golden House. You had the Brown County Clerk of Courts, the Brown County Circuit Court, the Brown County Sheriff's Office, the We All Rise African American Resource Center, the Family Services of Northeast Wisconsin Sexual Assault Center, the Brown County Health and Human Services was represented, the State of Wisconsin Department of Corrections was represented, the Lawrence Police Department, the Green Bay Police Department, the Public Defender's Office. And that's not even an exhaustive list, that's just a sampling of some of the people. You now have, like you said, over 40 people coming to these, and probably even then and more. Like you said, you learn a little bit each time about different things that you need to address. One of which was the language barriers that happens a lot with victims, that you have to figure out how you're going to solve that along the way, because it can't just be at one touch point that there's a language barrier. You have to make sure that the victim is heard and understood every point along the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, we are never going to have a scenario that honors every single challenge or nuance that victims have to go through. It's impossible, right? But we try. And so as we do more and more of these, we kind of tweak them, as we go, and so these scenarios continue to evolve. Honestly, the day when we feel that we have arrived is the day when we shouldn't be doing this anymore. So it's constant learning, and thank you for mentioning that. That is so important. And again, back to uh, me, for example, being an immigrant, you don't necessarily always think about, well, how can I advocate for myself, or how can I talk to victim witness, or how can I seek research if languages, how can I describe my experience if I don't speak language, or how. So again, back to that meaningful access. We want to make sure that victims are accessing their rights in a way that is meaningful to them. And the only way to do that is to really identify, to the best of our ability, all the ways in which victims may have challenges in accessing those rights. And so again, that conversation allows us to continue to identify and discover all different ways in which that's happening, and then again find ways to remedy that.
Right. And once again, I think, we all benefit from your being the point person here, because you bring such a unique perspective, and an important perspective, because you see it through the eyes of not just a victim witness advocate now, but through the eyes of a survivor. And so you know what it was like during your trauma moment, during your trauma years. And, one of the things that I think I hear pretty consistently, and I saw when I was a prosecutor myself for many years, is that, victims, when they're thrust into the criminal justice process, it's very intimidating for a whole lot of reasons. But when they're in that trauma moment, it's very difficult, especially considering the circumstances that brought them there, to know who to trust
Sure.
and to have the confidence that they're in good hands. And it's so important. And I heard some feedback from some of the people that were involved in your mapping exercise, and they talk about the fact that it's really important for all of them to be coordinated so they can give the best services, because of the communication that goes through the different agencies that you convened. And the reason why that's important from the victim standpoint and the survivor standpoint is that they have the confidence that, okay, the DA's office knows my story. The sheriff's office knows my story. The domestic abuse shelter knows my story. They feel more and more confident as they go along the way, that they don't have to continue to try to tell their story, explain their story, try to tell who they are. And all of a sudden their confidence begins to build, because they're not just a piece of evidence, but they're a story, and they know that they're in good hands. Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. And I think one of the things that our team in Wisconsin has done so well, in addition to, projects like this that we have done and continue to do, is really raising awareness on rights that are available to victims in the state of Wisconsin. And that is so important because, and I am never going to sit here and speak on behalf of survivors, because every survivor's story and journey is unique to them. But I can speak for myself and say that to me, knowledge and awareness is empowering. And so being your own best advocate is so important. And so part of the mapping exercise when we work with stakeholders is not only, it's primarily looking into, how are we affording victims rights that they are entitled to, but it's also how are we educating them along the way. And that starts with law enforcement, right? And then throughout the system, how are we, and always making sure that we bring everything back to the victim. Because, as you said, we do not want them to just be an object. They already have something that happened to them. Now we want them to be part of the process in a way that's meaningful to them, in a way that they choose to be part of the process. And that starts with educating them. That starts with reminding them of the choice that they have, reminding them of the kind of input that they can have throughout the process, and also helping them understand what it means to have a meaningful input. And an example of that would be, and I'm speaking for the state of Wisconsin, right? Like the right to be heard. Great. But what does that really mean? What does that mean on day to day, hearing to hearing? So one of the things, for example, that we kind of discovered and or recognized throughout our conversations in these mapping exercises is, okay, yes, victims have the right to be heard at every hearing, but how can we help them that at any particular hearing, what they're saying in that moment is most helpful to them? So we worked with judges, we worked with district attorney offices to really walk victims even more through that process and help them with that, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and yeah, I think what is most important here is that everybody understands that when Marsy's Law comes into a state and it's passed, that we do everything we can to make sure that Marsy's Law is working and that we continue to improve it. And we're always there to support all of the stakeholders that have to implement Marsy's Law every single day. And most importantly, like you said, the victims themselves, to know that we're there and that their constitutional rights, although they don't just exist, they will be explained to them. They will be explained to them, and they are meaningful and enforceable. Because the fact that Marsy's Law of constitutional rights just exist is one thing. But when a victim goes into the process, they need to know what those mean. And that's where people at the Marsy's Law in the different states, especially with leaders like you, become so important.
Well, enforceability, thank you. That's such an important thing because, again, like, what do you do when your right gets violated or potentially violated? And I can tell you, Crime Victims' Rights Board, that is uh, a place in Wisconsin that a body in Wisconsin that receives complaints on potential violations of victims' rights and then really looks into what remedy, how to remedy that. I can tell you that the number of complaints really went up, and regardless of whether how those get resolved, the fact that people are more aware of their rights, the fact that people are talking about victims' rights, that is all thanks to really all the stakeholders in the state, but also to awesome team. I'm not the only one in this amazing team in Wisconsin, really to the work that started even before me, that we continue to do. And I'm very grateful to be part of that team.
Yeah, and we're really grateful and very blessed to have you leading Wisconsin and to be such a national voice for Marsy's Law. And what happens after Marsy's Law is passed, I've noticed from state to state, is that it really creates a certain culture, a victim-centered approach and a victim-centered culture that all of the different stakeholders in the criminal justice process, including public defenders that you so wisely have brought in to your mapping exercises, that people understand that this transcends politics. This is all about the pursuit of justice, and that it's even-handed, and that it's most importantly that it's available to victims. So I just wanted to thank you again, and you really are such a shining example of somebody who has turned a very, very traumatic and tragic experience in your life and turned it into helping other people, and it's translated into a purpose for you that it's helped and touched so many lives. And all I could think of when I thought of that story, that when you talked about seeing the Statue of Liberty, as you remember, I remember it from years ago when you talked about the fact that you weren't sure exactly what freedom meant, but you knew that it was on the horizon. I think of all of the victims that and survivors that you help and that Marsy's Law helps, and all of the people that are partners with Marsy's Law. And when they come in to the criminal justice system, which is so scary and so intimidating. But when they see a friendly face like yours, they know that there is hope and that they don't know what it means, but that hope is on the horizon. So we're very blessed to have you, Nela, and thank you so much for all that you do for Marsy's Law and for victims all across the country.
Well, thank you, Peter, so much. And I remain grateful to my, first and foremost, my Wisconsin team, and then all national team of Marsy's Law, because you guys gave me the opportunity to do this work. And I'm just, nothing would happen without that. So I appreciate the opportunity to do the work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nela, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, Peter.
Bye.
Bye.